My name is Jennifer Zito, and I sit on the Sentencing Commission. I am a criminal defense lawyer of 34 years. I actually graduated from UConn Law in 1988, and I represent the Connecticut Criminal Defense Lawyers Association on the commission. I'm very honored to moderate this panel today, and I want to thank all of you for coming, and particularly for the panel members who have generously agreed to serve on this important panel. As Judge Pavia told you, the Sentencing Commission is critical to our criminal justice system because we address important issues of public policy through data-driven studies, research trends nationwide, and collaboration with all of the system stakeholders. No issue, in my mind, is more pressing than the mental health crisis in our society and in our criminal justice system today. Connecticut is most definitely at a crossroads, recognizing that our reliance on corrections to house and treat the mentally ill who find their way into the system in large number, often repeatedly, is costly and misplaced. It has enormous fiscal, health, and human costs. We've only just begun to realize the magnitude of this problem and sit firmly at the crossroads, demanding direction forward on this complex issue. One thing is clear: this is a multi-agency problem and cannot be addressed without collaboration, cooperation, and a collective understanding of the societal costs of incarcerating the mentally ill. Through this panel, we will learn about one senator's Department of Corrections experience leading to her intentional steps to address this issue, the Commission's ongoing studies to gather and analyze data from the Department of Corrections regarding mental illness in its inmate population, legislative initiatives intended to divert prosecution of the mentally ill, the results of those initiatives so far, and the frustrations and problems we still face in representing the accused with mental health problems. My hope is to reserve a little time at the end for questions, but I'm going to begin now with Connecticut State Senator Catherine Austin. Senator, thank you for being here and for your work in this field. It is critical to the criminal justice process. Can you please tell us a bit about your background and how you came to request the Sentencing Commission to undertake a study on mental illness in the state's incarcerated population?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this issue. So I started actually when well, let me just say, I worked in the Department of Correction for 21 years. I worked at 7 correctional facilities, both male and female, both minimum, medium, and maximum facilities. And I worked as both a correctional officer and a correctional lieutenant, working on weekends and holidays and all shifts that were there, and thoroughly, actually, I really enjoyed the work. I never thought that I would really enjoy the work, but I enjoyed the work and found that there were a number of different issues that we could deal with that would make things better for the people that were incarcerated and ultimately their families that lose those people. And it quite frankly was a great career. So I got elected to the Senate in 2012, and there's always been a single issue in the Department of Correction that I felt that we had to deal with. And prior to this actually coming up for us to do this study, I had put in for 3 years in a row, I had put in through the Judiciary Committee, asking them to deal with the issue of the number of inmates that were incarcerated that were chronically mentally ill. And I felt as a society, we did not recognize chronic mental illness. We did not akin it to a chronic cardiac or a chronic diabetes or any of medical issues. We thought that people should just get better. And we closed in the state of Connecticut and across this nation, we closed our psychiatric facilities and said that we really didn't need the help for people that were chronically mentally ill. And so because we have done that, our correctional facilities have become quasi-psychiatric institutions. But I couldn't prove it by the numbers because everybody would say that that's just anecdotal information. So I started working in the Department of Correction in 1989. And in 1989, about 5% of the inmate population were chronically mentally ill. Our psychiatric institutions were still open. There was a way to divert them into the care that they needed if they entered into the criminal justice system. And then the decision was made to close those facilities, and we were supposed to, as a society and as a state, we were supposed to open up supportive housing environments and have wraparound services for people who had chronic mental illness. But politicians being what they are, they decided that was too expensive, and we just never provided the correct services for people. And the criminal justice system was left with dealing with the problems of people that had no services, had no place to go, and committed, in many cases, minor issues. They may be even minor felonies. They might have gotten involved in an assault or something else, like if someone invaded their space and the person invading that space did not realize that this person was experiencing mental illness or a break. So they ended up being in the criminal justice system, and we often ended up with them with long-term sentencing into the Department of Correction. So I kept asking for this study to be done for 3 years, and finally decided that when I got to be in the department, I got lucky enough to be appointed as chair of appropriations through Senator Looney. And when he did that, I said, this is the one issue that I would like to see us do something about, and actually come up with the numbers. So I asked the Sentencing Commission if they would take on looking at how many people in the Department of Correction were chronically mentally ill. And the numbers they came up with out of that one study were astounding. They came up with 28% of male inmates were chronically mentally ill, and 80% of female inmates were chronically mentally ill. And those numbers in and of themselves should give us pause, in my opinion, but those numbers came from the information that was given to the Department of Correction upon the incarceration of an individual. And so they were self-disclosed numbers. And I always felt that the numbers were low for male inmates and probably a little high for female inmates, as those two populations are completely different from each other. Male inmates tend not to disclose their past or anything that is problematic for them, and female inmates tend to talk a lot about it. And so I asked if we could do a further study, and then in this last budget cycle put $500,000 in to increase the study. And the second study that's out is just in draft form now. So I think that and it basically backs up what the original study says. That we have essentially decided as a society and as Connecticut policymakers that our Department of Corrections and our institutions were going to be quasi-psychiatric institutions, and we were going to serve that population by incarcerating them. Now, imagine somebody who gets out of the Department of Corrections. They already have a chronic mental illness. Now they have an inmate number. They can't get housing. They can't get medical care because they don't have stable housing, and they can't get a job because they've been incarcerated. So they have 3 strikes against them, often many more than that. So my goal here as someone who is a policymaker is to change this dynamic and to provide resources akin to, there was an old project, and I didn't get to listen to the keynote speaker, but there was an old project in New York City called the Nathaniel Project that provided resources from the initial help that someone may need to a drop-down unit, and then ultimately to efficiency apartments that with wraparound services. And yes, that's expensive, but I just can't say enough how expensive it is the way we're doing it right now, and what a waste of human life it is. And I would like to just say one other thing. Many people in the Department of Correction often don't even know when someone comes in if they have a chronic mental health issue. They just don't know. You're not told. So you have the custody staff who are responsible for the day-to-day activities of the inmate population does not have the information that they need to make appropriate decisions if someone is decompensating because they're not taking their medication. They don't even know what medications they're on, and they don't know if they're refusing their medications. And I think that that's something that we also have to look at. If we're going to make the Department of Correction the institution for taking care of people with chronic mental illness, we have to provide the staff with the understanding of who they are taking care of. And lastly, I went out to Garner Correctional Institution, which was designed as a mental health facility within the confines of the Department of Correction. And the numbers that they said, that the people that they were taking care of, one, they are desperately in need of staffing. They don't have enough medical or mental health staff there. Often LPNs are filling in for RNs, taking care of the inmate population out there. And staff often working more than 16 hours because there isn't anybody to take their place. And they said they take care of more people with chronic mental illness than CVH and Whiting combined. And that should also give you pause. And that's at one institution. That's not at all institutions. And when you add up the numbers of, even if you take at face value the 28% of male inmates and the 80% of female inmates, and no female inmates are at Garner and not receiving that additional care that that mental health facility has, that should also give you pause. So that's why I wanted to do this study, and I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Senator. We certainly appreciate you being the impetus for this study and for this conversation, obviously. So the commission, as Senator Alston said, was requested by her in 2020 to look at the mental health need classifications in our prison population, just to get a sense of the numbers of inmates requiring mental health. We have expanded that study since, and the new report will be out in December. And the commission intends to report that over 31% of our incarcerated population was classified as having a mental health disorder requiring treatment, and an additional 41% of inmates are classified as having a prior history of a mental health disorder but don't currently require treatment. And as Senator Alston pointed out, this information is self-reported. So the numbers very well are much greater. The commission will publish a more comprehensive report in December, I believe, and it's going to contain an analysis of the data sets obtained, breaking out diagnosed conditions, offenses charged, and sentences given. Dr. Reena Kapoor is an associate professor of psychiatry in the law from Yale School of Medicine, and she is with us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Kapoor, for your critical work in this area. Her clinical work focuses on the intersection of mental illness, violence, and the criminal justice system. She has been actively involved with the Commission's DOC study. So, Doctor, I would ask you to speak to that, and if you could please tell us the scope of the study, its objectives and findings to date, that would be wonderful.
Sure, although I'll admit you guys just stole a little bit of my thunder.
Sorry.
But no, so thank you everybody for having me here and for arranging all of this. Like Senator Alston, one of my first jobs after I finished training was working in the Department of Correction. I was a psychiatrist at that time in 2009, and we had about 19,000 people incarcerated in the Connecticut DOC in 2009. And today, that number is about half, somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000. And that, I think, is in part because of the work of all the people in this room, sort of Connecticut taking very seriously the effort at decarceration or finding alternatives to incarceration for people. But one of the questions that I've had as a psychiatrist all along is kind of whether people with mental illness are the ones who are being left behind in our incarceration system, either because they're somehow being overlooked or they're not being considered for early release or diversion programs, or there aren't enough resources, or any of those explanations. That's how sort of my interest in trying to look more closely at what are the diagnoses and the mental health needs of our Connecticut's incarcerated population today. So as Attorney Zito mentioned, I've been working with the Sentencing Commission for the past few years to try and answer that question. And honestly, it hasn't been easy to get access to the data that we need, and we still only have just a little bit. So the study is still very much a work in progress, but $500,000 will hopefully go a long way towards getting some more data, some more answers, so we'll be able to share more information with you a few years from now. But so what we have today is essentially we were given from DOC a snapshot of a single day in January of 2022. What are the mental health scores of everybody who's incarcerated on that day? What are their substance abuse classification scores? And then matched that in a de-identified way without any names, but with those people's demographic information about age, race, gender, and then about their sentence length and the controlling offense, which means like the highest charge for which they are either sort of pretrial or convicted of. And that's what we were given, just sort of a database of about 20,000 different diagnoses and records belonging to about the sort of 9,000 people who were incarcerated on that day. And then we had a team of psychiatrists who took all those diagnoses. There were almost 1,000 different sort of text fields of diagnoses, and we coded them and broke them down into 17 different diagnostic categories based on the DSM-5, which is the diagnosis manual for psychiatric disorders. And that's how we then sort of analyzed the data and were able to arrive at some of the things that you just heard about, those numbers. So what we found was, as you already heard, is that 31.6% of our incarcerated population on that day in January of 2022 was classified as having a mental health disorder that requires treatment. So DOC uses a mental health classification system of 1 to 5. 5 is sort of the most acute. 1 means that you have no history of problems, you need no treatment. And so what we're looking at is sort of those with a score of 3 or higher when we say those who are inactive or have chronic mental health needs. And so that's the number, that's 31% of the DOC population on a given day has mental health needs. The most common diagnoses among those are actually not surprising if you know anything about this population. They're mood disorders like major depression and bipolar disorder. They're PTSD. They're personality disorders. They're psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and also anxiety disorders. And the most common of all the disorders were mood disorders and PTSD. So those numbers are far greater than the average US population, where, for example, 1 to 2% of the population has a psychotic disorder, but in DOC that number is 8%. And for mood disorders in the US population, 5 or 6% has a mood disorder, and in DOC that number is 24%. So these are orders of magnitude greater representation of mental illness in our incarcerated population than in our US population. And then, of course, they're not equally distributed. It's not that, like when you look at and break things down by race, by gender, and by age, you find a number of other really important things for us to consider. So you already heard that for women, the number of people who have a mental health score of 3 or higher is more like 80%, rather than the total 31%. So the reason that like that 80% doesn't skew the overall number more is just because women make up such a small percentage of the overall incarcerated population. But there's a tremendous need within women. And then what you also see is that white people are significantly have higher rates of diagnosis of mental illness than people of color, than Black and Latinx people in particular. So that could be that there's simply a higher prevalence of mental disorder in white people as opposed to other groups. But I think we also have to think about whether there is, implicit bias in our diagnostic system, because these aren't actually just self-report measures. These are things that the mental health professionals in DOC have diagnosed the people with. So this is not someone coming in and saying, I have schizophrenia. This is what the electronic medical record in DOC says is their diagnosis. So I think we have to really reckon with the idea that we, in general in our society, have a tendency to see Black and Latinx men in particular as bad rather than sick, and we may be underdiagnosing mental illness in that population. And then, of course, we also have to think about stigma and culture and the ways in which different groups will actually come forward and say that they're having mental health problems as well. We also noted that the percentage of mental illness is significantly higher in the unsentenced population versus the sentenced population in Connecticut. And that's particularly true of people with psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. They're twice as prevalent in the unsentenced population versus the sentenced population. And the opposite is true of personality disorders, that those are more represented in people who have been sentenced. And then the final thing I'll mention is that people who are under 25 years old have a much higher representation of mental illness than those who are older. When you put substance abuse on top of kind of mental illness, what you find is really just staggering numbers, basically, that 81% of the DOC population has either a mental illness diagnosis, a substance use disorder diagnosis, or both of those things. And then if you factor in not just on that day who has those diagnoses, but ever in their lifetime, that number is 96% of the prison population has at one point or another had either a mental illness diagnosis or a substance use disorder diagnosis. So there's simply like no question at this point that people in our current prison population have significant mental health needs, and that their rates of mental illness and substance use disorders far outpace our general US population. And so it kind of, for me, raises the question of like, how is this possible given how hard everybody has been working to keep people with mental illness out of the prison system in the past few decades in this state? So I certainly I hope that we have a little bit of time to talk about that at the end. But I just want to spend one moment talking about sentence length too, because this is also interesting. I'll say that these are very, very preliminary data. But, if you may be asking yourself, well, maybe the people who have mental illness in our prison population, those are the ones who couldn't be diverted because they committed some very, very serious offenses. And so we looked at that question too. And the answer is that, let's say you take all the prisoners who have been convicted of murder, and you look at the representation of people's mental illness. What you find is mental illness, less of those people have mental illness proportionally than the general prison population, which sort of tells you that it's not that the people with mental illness are the ones committing the very most serious crimes, and that's why they're incarcerated now. So I guess what I take away from all of this is that it suggests that our systems that are in place for diversion and for keeping people with mental illness out of the criminal justice system or out of prison are working to an extent. The fact that pretrial people have a higher rate of mental illness could mean that people are getting diverted into programs at the time of sentencing, and then they're no longer represented in that sentence population. I didn't mention this, but one of the other findings is that people with mental illness are serving shorter sentences than people without mental illness in DOC. And that could be because judges are very reasonably and appropriately taking into account mental illness when they are deciding upon someone's sentence. And yet we're still left in this place where we have thousands of people with mental illness who are still in our prison system, and not just for the most serious offenses like murder or rape. And so for me, I think we need to think as a society about where we devote our efforts next. You know, are we okay with incarceration for this population of people who, for example, someone may have committed a string of burglaries and also has a diagnosis of depression and PTSD? And maybe the answer is everyone's just fine with that person being incarcerated. And in which case, then we need to devote more resources into providing proper mental health care within the prison system. But if we're not okay with that, then I think we really do need to redouble our efforts at diversion and look at more creative solutions for all those people who are in like the middle zone, you know, that they're not like misdemeanors where it's sort of easy for everyone to agree, okay, this person doesn't belong in prison. But offenses that are maybe like a little bit more serious than that, is there something more that we could be doing to serve that population? So with that, I will turn things back over to Attorney Zito.
Thank you, Dr. Kapoor. Actually, that could lead right into Chief State's Attorney Patrick Griffin's here, and he is here to talk about one of those diversion efforts that's been mandated by the legislature in 2017, beginning with pilot programs in what has been called the ESI program, and I'll have Chief State's Attorney Pat Griffin address that for us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. You know, as the new Chief State's Attorney, I was appointed in May. I think it's important that the Division of Criminal Justice is represented in a forum like this, and that the division acknowledges that mental health is a serious issue that is confronting the criminal justice system at all levels. Anyone who's spent any amount of time in a courthouse, particularly a GA courthouse, would recognize that while we do not have mental health courts in Connecticut, in many ways our courts have become mental health courts in the sense of the vast proportion of individuals, and I think the statistics that the doctor pointed out are exactly what prosecutors see every day. In other words, people who come in with mental illness, substance abuse, dual diagnosis. Before I talk about ESI in general, I want to give you some statistics that I think are really interesting that were recently released by the Office of Policy and Management regarding prosecutorial data. So 2021, prosecutors in the state of Connecticut handled 98,729 criminal cases in 13 judicial districts. Of those cases, 71% of those cases were misdemeanors. And that's staggering when you think about it, because I think that when we talk about crime, what gets the headlines, unfortunately, right, are the horrific offenses that catch people's attention. But 71% of the cases that were handled in the courts were misdemeanors, 10% were infractions, 19% were felonies. Of those felonies, you can break them down even further. A felonies, which are murders, home invasions, 1.1%. Class B felonies, 6.9%, and Class C felonies, 26.7%. Then Class D felonies at 51.9%. Before I really get into ESI, I think it's important to understand that as a premise that GAs, or low-level, so in Connecticut, the court system is divided into Part A, High Court, which handles all Class A and B felonies, and GAs, which handles the rest, everything from infractions up to C felonies. The GAs handle 95% of all criminal cases in the state of Connecticut, and only 2% are handled in Part A. Last year, 59% of the cases that were handled by prosecutors were nollied, which I think is a very significant number. On average, it takes 8 months to nollie a case. Now, we're diving deeper into that because this is new territory for the Division of Criminal Justice in that we have not collected data like this previously. But what we know from that 8-month statistic is that cases are being diverted by prosecutors or prosecutorial diversions are happening at a high rate. In other words, as a matter of course, if a case comes in right out of the box and a prosecutor makes a determination that there's no probable cause, it doesn't take 8 months to make that determination. But an individual might come in, and that individual may have manifested a criminal behavior, and the prosecutors are interested in determining what is causing that criminal behavior on the one hand, and trying to come up with some solutions to prevent recurrence of criminal behavior on the other. And so that leads into the ESI. So as Attorney Zito pointed out, in 2017, the Division of Criminal Justice was given a mandate to create a pilot program that would address substance abuse, mental health, and homelessness, and to try to create a program that would divert those individuals, knowing what we know now, that 70% of the cases coming before the court are misdemeanors. The ESI program, I think, is particularly applicable. What is ESI? It's called the Early Screening Initiative, and what it does is it allows a prosecutor to review a case prior to the court case being docketed. The reason for that is the prosecutor makes a determination. Should that case even be docketed? There are many cases that, upon reflection and having the time, the state makes a determination that while there may have been a criminal offense, prosecution is not warranted, and there doesn't appear to be an underlying issue that requires diversion, and that case is diverted immediately off the books. It doesn't show up. What's important to understand that under the Connecticut system, the police make the initial arrest, the police make the initial charging decision, and a case generally makes the docket without any prosecutor's input whatsoever. The Early Screening Initiative allows prosecutors, it returns really the prosecutorial function, which is essential, this screening process. As I say to the new prosecutors in the Division of Criminal Justice, prosecutors are not police officers with briefcases. Our job is to determine whether or not at the first instance a case meets the criteria to be docketed. The Early Screening Initiative allows us to do that. The second component of the Early Screening Initiative is really the key to it, in my mind. The second component is that in our 6 locations, which we have up and running presently, which are Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Waterbury, New London, and Norwich, we have a social service coordinator that works with a dedicated ESI prosecutor. And when that screening process is made, a decision is then made if this case needs to come into the Superior Court. Are there underlying issues that can be addressed with a social service coordinator, such as mental health, homelessness, and substance abuse? Now, I'm not here to tell you that ESI has tackled the issue of either substance abuse or mental health, and I'm certainly not here to tell you that we have decided, that I have a secret sauce on homelessness. In fact, ESI, like all the components of the criminal justice system, homelessness is an issue that needs to be tackled. Secure, stable housing is key to returning an individual to a productive, capacity. But let me share with you some statistics that I think are interesting. So what we did is, in 2019, we went to the legislature as mandated and presented the legislature with a report on how the program had run. And in order to do that, we set up a control group. The control group was Norwalk Superior Court, Norwalk GA, and Stanford GA. And we compared that control group to these ESI sites. And I think it's relatively startling. I think it's pretty significant. 77.1% of cases in the ESI sites received diversion for targeted or flagged areas. Those flagged areas were substance abuse, mental health, or homelessness. 73% of substance abuse cases were diverted into relevant programs. What's really important, I think, about the social service coordinator, is that the Division of Criminal Justice is not trying to build its empire. Social service coordinators are locally sourced. So if you look at the program in New Haven, where I was the state's attorney, our social service coordinator came from Cornell Scott. In Hartford, it would be Community Partners in Action, New London, Reliance Health. That's particularly important because local service providers are in the best position to understand the services that are actually available in that community. 93.4%, I think this is important, particularly relevant for what we're talking about today. 93.4% of targeted mental health cases that came through ESI sites were diverted into programs. So this year, I'm asking to expand the ESI program to all 13 judicial districts. What I'm only asking for, in reality, is to get that social service coordinator to sit with the prosecutor. Now, some may have questions and say, well, I don't know about this. Is a prosecutor delving into an area that's not his or her business? I don't think so. The judge said today, and I agree with him, in order to tackle the issue of substance abuse, mental health, and homelessness, the DAs and the state's attorneys, the chief state's attorneys, the Division of Criminal Justice must play a role. We're not cutting into the private defense bar or the public defender's area because first, I must emphasize, it's a voluntary program. If you don't want to participate in ESI, you don't have to participate in ESI. If you want a public defender, you can apply for a public defender and come back to ESI. If you want a private attorney, you can come back to ESI. This is a voluntary program. I'll close with this. In 2016, I was appointed as the state's attorney in New Haven, and we attempted a program called LEAD, Law Enforcement Assistant Diversion. The theory of LEAD was this. We went out to Seattle. We met with the Seattle police chiefs and social workers and mental health professionals, and they had come up with this program called Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. And the theory was to have specially trained police officers in place. You stop a car at 2 in the morning, individual has a couple of bags of heroin. There would be what was referred to as a warm handoff. There would be no arrest. The arrest would be held in abeyance. The handoff would be to a mental health worker, and we would then, or the law enforcement officials would then monitor for compliance. We tried that in New Haven. We had almost no success, and the reason was people didn't want to do it. People have to be ready mentally to do this. People have to be in a position mentally to ask for help. And that's why having the the ESI program with the benefit of the court, I do think is a step forward. Again, I'm not here, and I want to be as clear as I can, I'm not here to say that ESI is the silver bullet to mental health. But I do think that the statistics do support that we should pursue this particular program with vigor. It requires, as the judge mentioned, it requires prosecutors who are willing to buy into a program. It requires judges who are willing to buy into a program. And most importantly, it requires, in my mind, social service coordinators who can help my people understand the intricacies of substance abuse, mental health, and homelessness. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to confirm that right now that program is limited to low-level misdemeanor offenses.
So Jen, each site has some flexibility in allowing individuals into the ESI program. We do have some hard stops. Okay, domestic violence. We're not diverting domestic violence cases into ESI. Sexual assault cases, we're not diverting into ESI. And motor vehicle cases, by and large, are not being diverted into ESI. So by and large, it's misdemeanors, but in places like New Haven and places like Hartford, it's not uncommon to have an individual, for example, that has what we believe to be a psychotic break, who may have been engaged in an act of violence, where we can get the victim on board to divert. In other words, that we engage with the victim at the initiation to say, we do have this program. This is not simply a nollie, without services and substance to it. But it is fair to say that this program overwhelmingly is designed for low-level offenses. And that's why I started with the fact that 70% of our cases are coming into the GAs. And to sort of tie into what the doctor is saying, this is where we can stop those individuals from progressing into more serious acts of violence, which then become increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to divert, because now we're dealing with many other factors.
Thank you. I have a couple more questions about that. So right now, how many jurisdictions is the ESI program in?
6.
And your intention with your office is to try to spread it to all 13 judicial districts?
My intention, my request is to get these social service coordinators into all 13 judicial districts. Some of those may require more than one social service coordinator. So for example, previously I was the state's attorney in New Haven, and we had a robust ESI program in downtown New Haven. But Meriden is a satellite GA, and Meriden has high rates of crime, and that would benefit. So I'd like to see social service coordinators in all 13 JDs, and I'd like to see that over the course of the next year.
And lastly, I would ask, how will your office ensure consistency across all jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think that's really crucial, and that's a great question. And so Gail Hardy, who is the former state's attorney in Hartford, is going to actually begin to coordinate the ESI for across the state. One of the things that we need to do, or two things that we need to do, we need to ensure that admission criteria, if you will, is being consistently applied, number one, and number two, I want to see consistent data tracking, and so I think that will answer that question more definitively.
And there will be specialized training for the ESI prosecutors who are screening the cases?
Yes.
Thank you very much. There are additional diversionary programs available in the state of Connecticut for people with mental illness involved in the system, such as the supervised pretrial diversionary program. And there is also, through the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, a respite program and some jail diversionary programs. The Chief Public Defender, Tashawn Bowden-Lewis, is with us to speak how mental health is addressed in the court system based on her experience as a veteran public defender serving in Waterbury and now as the Chief of the Public Defender's Office. So Attorney Bowden-Lewis, Chief Bowden-Lewis, if you would.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the Sentencing Commission for allowing me to be here, and of course to be with this wonderful panel of knowledgeable people. So I am Tashawn Bowden-Lewis, and I'm elated to be the Chief Public Defender for the state of Connecticut. I just wanted to give you all a little bit of information about who we are as a division, and then go into what is going on with many of our clients and their families in regards to mental health. So our division is holistic, and it's all-encompassing. We handle juvenile cases, delinquency defense, family magistrate, family support magistrate, adults. We deal with every kind of situation, whether it be habeas, appellate. We are truly all-encompassing, and we have a full staff. Our division is fully staffed, but not only our amazing attorneys, but also our social workers, our investigators. We have what we need in order to meet our clients' needs. And we do service over 100,000 cases every single year. And so I am proud to be at the helm of the agency at this point in time and at this moment in time. So in regards to mental health and our clients, it is a very pervasive and pressing issue. There are programs that are out there, but obviously not enough. I appreciate Dr. Kapoor's information regarding race and culture, because too often those things are not taken into consideration. I'm sure we all know here that there are always problems with beds, availability for things of that nature, even just getting into the process of actually having to consistently have a judge grant a program. That's a problem, a lack of consistency in that area. And then when it comes to the fact of just what kinds of cases are actually able to go into these programs. Yes, they're mostly misdemeanor cases, but we already know that there are things that are happening that the people, in terms of their crises and what's happening with them mentally, that can get out of hand. And so sometimes there are felonies that are involved, they're not able to be utilized for these kinds of programs. So we need more programs, more diversity in the type of programs that are out there, and more programs that focus on issues that are culturally sensitive to clients, as well as to the racial disparities that happen all the time. I am just kind of finding out more information about the ESI program. I appreciate the more information from the state's attorney's office as well, too. I do want to say that in the process of talking about this program, that there is a dual role. The importance of the defense attorney is very important. Everybody has the right to counsel. And so that has to be at the table as well, too, when you're talking about the judges and the prosecutors who are involved in these kind of decisions. The fact that there are social workers that are in our agency that help our clients all the time, and we have a team of people that are here to assist our clients, especially those who are mentally ill, is very, very important. So that the thoughts in regards to the expansion of ESI and what that really means needs to encompass what the person has to deal with, the urgency of the situation, and the fact that the right to counsel has to always be there and be present from the very, very beginning.
Yeah, terrific, thank you. So could you just explain a little bit about the supervised pretrial diversionary program so folks know
Sure.
what that program was created for?
Sure. That deals with people who have psychiatric disabilities and for veterans as well, mental illness. So that is one program that is specifically geared towards that area. But again, that's one program. And that's actually an actual problem. We need more programs. There's the DEMAS respite program that's out there, as well as programs that deal with drug addiction and substance abuse. Dual diagnosis is a very important part, but that one program does deal specifically with those with psychiatric disabilities and who are veterans.
So in that program, applicants, there are excluded offenses for that program. The criminally accused can apply for that program 3 times.
Yes.
And they can be placed on a period of probation where they're supervised by the Office of Adult Probation for a period of up to 2 years.
Correct.
And so probation does an in-depth study. I think their resources are limited as well as to the mental health conditions of the accused. And then the application goes before the court, which can be objected to by the state.
Right.
And further is within the discretion of the court to grant or deny. Personally, as a private criminal defense lawyer, you know, I have many clients that have applied for this program, and I think that Connecticut needs to, and I wonder if you agree on this, needs to beef up its services because probation may be overburdened. We do not have the expertise in mental health issues
Right.
or the resources for the programming for the intensive supervision. So the intention of the program is for the accused to be monitored intensely while participating in mental health treatment. And that treatment design is often left to either the accused to provide through care providers they have or would like to have, or it's left to probation to decide. And I know I've heard from judges throughout the state that they are leery of that program and not necessarily satisfied with the proposals that are made for supervision. Is that your experience?
That's true, and obviously if the person does complete the program, then they're eligible for dismissal, but if they don't, then there's the prosecution aspect, right? That there's a problem with that as well, too, that because failure in of itself can be very subjective in terms of what that really means. So if you fail the program, then you're looking at jail time.
And do you have any recommendations or thoughts about programming or specific programs that you feel could be improved upon?
Sure. Definitely more programs that are dual diagnosed, because the mental health capacity as well as substance abuse is huge for many of the people that we serve. So we need more programs, more availability of the programs, more beds that are available, but that whole component, because the mental health piece is huge, but it's often coupled with substance abuse of some kind, and we need to be able to attack that and to be able to address that and provide resources for people I think that Judge Bianco was talking about access and opportunity. Many times, when you brought up the fact that there's ability to object on the prosecutor's end in terms of programming, that carries a lot of weight for many judges. And so if there's a reason that the prosecutor may feel that the person should not get into a program, that can be very difficult to overcome. Programs that deal with, again, cultural and racial sensibilities as well, too, is very important, because not everybody is the same. It's not cookie cutter. It's not always just out of the straight from the book.
Thank you. And so lastly, Senator Austin, could you please let us know of any other initiatives that are being taken by the General Assembly to address the intersection of mental health and the criminal justice system?
So every year, there are a number of initiatives that happen in the General Assembly relative to the criminal justice system. And this report will put some ability for people to accept what's going on relative to mental health. And I think that many people in the General Assembly need a report like this to actually validate the number of people that are incarcerated with mental health issues. I do think that, and I appreciated what everybody had to say on this issue. That even with all the people that are diverted and all the people that are in programs, the number of people that are incarcerated today that are chronically mentally ill is still unacceptable, and this outlines that they were not provided the resources for a program, whether it was because someone objected to it at any level, or their particular community did not have the mental health resources to ever diagnose that person. So we get people that are incarcerated that may not have been diagnosed until they became incarcerated, and then maybe if there were enough psychiatrists or mental health professionals within the system themselves, they may have been diagnosed there. But the numbers themselves show that even with all the supports that are there today, there's still not enough available, and the number of people that are incarcerated. As a matter of fact, one of the questions I asked the Sentencing Commission was, were the number of people that were given halfway house availability or early discharge of one form or another with a mental health issue, were they kept incarcerated for longer periods of time? And I think they are, because they're not accepted into programs, because the fact is it costs more money to take care of someone who has a mental health issue. So I look forward to seeing the number of initiatives that will start this year. I have a few of my own.
Terrific, thank you. I wanted to reserve some time for questions, so if anyone has any questions of any of the panelists, please feel free at this time. Certainly.
I'm sorry, I'll try to pitch my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to speak during the symposium. My name is Thomas Lee. I'm an assistant public defender from Danbury Judicial District. And so much. Wow, this is really intimidating all of a sudden. You'd think I'm paid to speak for a living, that I wouldn't be that nervous, but Attorney Bowden-Lewis, it's a pleasure to meet you today. I'm not speaking as an advocate of the division, just simply as an attorney who works on the ground level in the GA every day. People talk about SDP. SDP is a fantastic program, but it's a program as a device of the court, really. It's not a program in and of itself. For example,
He's talking about the supervised pretrial diversionary program.
For example, just logistically speaking, it happens in 2 stages. You make the application, and then there's a 6 to 8 week turnaround time where my client is generally, hypothetically generally speaking, is not really connected to any services. They're waiting to do an evaluation. Oftentimes, most of the time, they're homeless. They're living from shelter to shelter, if they're lucky. For example, they're actually shutting our local shelter down in Danbury. If I have a client who's homeless today and they want a place to sleep tonight, they have to call crisis intervention to get screened, which means that they're not getting a bed today. But be that as it may, everyone's talking about we're putting people into programs or putting people into programs. And from my perspective, dealing with this population on a day-to-day basis, one of the things that my clients, even the ones who really do want to be engaged in treatment, are crying out for help, and there's just a lack of resources. Housing being chief among them. It's always, I have one of the greatest social workers in the state, in the history of the state of Connecticut, and she's one of the most experienced social workers we have in the division, and even she is powerless to try and get my people connected, and she knows everybody in Danbury. So what could be done to just address that one simple factor? Because if my clients have a place to sleep at night, the likelihood that they're going to get to that evaluation so that they can be properly diagnosed, which is another issue, is having people being properly diagnosed, it's so hard to get my people into places where they can succeed when they really have access to zero resources. Another thing, Chief Griffin, what you described in the ESI program, I think is really, it's the first time I've heard about it. It's interesting. I just wanted to ask, Judge Bianco said that there can't be a prosecutorial veto. And I was wondering, how could you distinguish ESI from a prosecutorial veto?
Well, I think that what the judge was talking about was mental health courts, whether you can get into a mental health court or not. The prosecutors in Connecticut have a constitutional obligation to review cases to determine whether they should be on the docket in the first instance, right? We all agree on that. What the ESI program allows us to do is give us more time. Now, you work in the Danbury GA. You know one of the problems is that every morning there's a long line of folks, and many of those folks are pro se. They're not going to qualify for public defender. They're charged with low-level offenses. And a prosecutor has very little time to interact with that individual. In fact, the first time that he or she meets them is the first time they're in front of them. The first time they look at that file is the first time they're in front of them. So the ESI program is not a veto. It's a screening method by which appropriate candidates that, again, with the social service coordinator with us, because I want to emphasize, we're not social service people. We need help. So having that component built into the state's attorney's office is sort of new, right, and helpful to say, what's bringing this person to Danbury Court over and over again on a larceny 6 or a breach of peace, and can we get that person to a program? But it's also voluntary. And again, I want to emphasize, because I agree with Tashawn, obviously we completely respect the right to all individuals to have to counsel. ESI does not limit that in any shape or form. So in New Haven, if you want to go into the ESI program with a public defender, you do that. You want a private attorney, you can do that. I don't know if that answered the question.
And Senator Austin wants to address the housing issue.
So if we're really going to be serious about housing, quite frankly, we've decreased over the last 4 years the amount of bonded dollars that have gone to build supportive housing. And there just is not enough supportive housing, and we do need more bonded dollars to be approved at the bond commission meetings each and every time we have a bond commission meeting, so that these projects take years to build, and without having housing that is of a supportive housing nature, we're going to be behind the 8 ball to getting anybody into real housing.
And so, Attorney Leaf, I think you raised a very astute point. I think Connecticut needs to do better. We do have things in place, but as Judge Bianco has described for us, a more comprehensive, collaborative program is something we really need to look into to address mental health, with particularly the statistics that these studies have shown. So I'm hoping by virtue of this panel today and Judge Bianco's keynote address that Connecticut will start thinking differently, that we will have a multi-agency approach with collaboration and cooperation, and also be able to, thanks to Senator Austin's initiative, to have a framework to bring to the legislature to say the numbers demand action. And I think the Sentencing Commission will be at the fore of that. Are there any other questions?
Hi, my name is Marisol Garcia. I'm right in front of you. So Connecticut is one of the leading places of many programs. I've been the beneficiary, formerly incarcerated. I have a question for all of you. Dr. Kapoor actually mentioned something on it, where sometimes with the incarcerated population, numbers are not accurate because there is no trust. So people are not going to fully disclose. Some men will not. Women may say, because it's easy to get services that way. So my question is I see everybody, there's a voice at the table. Everybody has a voice. However, what I'm asking is, have you sought input from the very population you're trying to represent? And I don't mean those that are still incarcerated. I'm talking about those who are home now, who can provide assistance with what housing looks like, preventative services, supportive services. Has anybody actually thought to ask the formerly incarcerated population? Because there are those of us, as a graduate of Trinity College who deals in public policy, there are many of us at the table who would love to have an input, but we are not allowed to do so for whatever reason or another, whether or not we don't know of commissions that are doing work, data research that's available that we would love to know what can we do to input or to be able to have respect on that. So I'm just looking to find out how can we, as formerly incarcerated individuals, get involved so we too have a voice at the table to better influence these policies, these research, and these programs, because they actually affect us. This housing issue, it's not just affecting those with mental health, because there is a large part of the incarcerated population that has that, but that continuum is because once you have incarceration behind you, that never goes away.
If I could address that first. The Division of Public Defender Services, yes, we have been making inroads in terms of dealing with impacted people. We've had them come aboard, talk to them already. As you know, I'm a new chief, so things are being tweaked and things are being different, changing at this point in time. So we have begun that. And actually, we're excited right now because community engagement and involvement is a huge part of where we're going with the divisions starting the new year. So actually on the ground, talking to people outside of the courthouse setting, because that's where our clients and our families are. And to be able to get the input, understand what's going on, and to build and foster the trust. Because you're right, that's a huge thing, even with their counsel. So I'm happy to say that we've already begun that work, and we're going to be doing even more of that work in the coming year.
Attorney Griffin?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, as a new chief state's attorney, formerly I was in New Haven, and community engagement was a centerpiece of our office's efforts. And working with previously incarcerated people was crucial. We had street outreach workers that were really important. They were members of my community engagement board, and we regularly met not only to give information as to what was going on in the office, but to receive in real time the thoughts and concerns of community members. So we're in the process of putting together a community engagement board for the chief state's attorney, and I had a first meeting a month ago, and I had representatives from around the state, and I can assure you that there were a number of folks that were formerly incarcerated individuals.
And just speaking for the commission, we often have people such as yourselves come who have expertise in the area, people who have experienced the issues that we're addressing, and we welcome your input. And I'm hopeful that we will create a subcommittee to address this issue in more detail, building off of the studies, and we will certainly reach out or you should reach out to us for your input. It's most welcome and an integral part of what happens going forward. Are there any other questions? I think we have time for one more. Sean?
Hi. I was a public defender down in New London for a number of years, and so I have a lot of familiarity with a lot of the things that are discussed here. I wanted to just point two things. The ESI program, I have nothing for praise for it, and that is because of the really good people that have been involved with it. In particular, you should just know that social service coordinator in New London is absolutely phenomenal. And we as public defenders, we're sometimes politicking to get the prosecutors to consider our people for ESI.
Say that again, please.
Because if we could get our clients working with the social service coordinator, she would be engaging them with services in the community, they would succeed, and they would get the good outcome. What made that work was the people. If you don't get the right prosecutor, if you don't get the right social service coordinator, it won't work. And you know, the buy-in has been tremendous there. It would just be, if you're going to expand it statewide, it's very important to get the right people to make it work. People need to embrace it and make it work. With regard to the excessive amounts of people who have mental health issues in the jail, I would say, especially the pretrial population, the key is at arraignment. The people from Demas, I think pretty much every GA's got someone who is a court liaison from Demas who's working with them. If the right people are there, if they're willing to come every day and engage with people and have the one-on-one and can keep on working with the one-on-one, not infrequently they're getting them the resources to convince the court to not lock the person up on the day of arraignment and get them into resources, into facilities, and that usually works in a progressing towards a good thing. Once they're already in jail, pulling them out again, you know, getting those resources, but much harder after arraignment. So in all of these things, it's getting the right people who have the commitment to work one-on-one with people going forward, and that's how people succeed. And, you know, as far as the SDP, my feeling always was, if you get people connected with resources before you even apply, and they're working with someone and they're happy with, when you make the application, people are going to successfully go through it. They're going to have a plan which is consistent with what they're already doing, so they're going to be willing to do it. And when they're willing to do it, probation's going to have a much easier time because people are going to simply do what they're already doing. Again, it's if the resources are there and people are willing to work one-on-one with people, there will be success. But it really requires good people and getting them lined up to do things.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the panel members for your time and your wisdom. I believe as stakeholders, we are all vested in this issue, and I believe that we will work together earnestly to address it going forward. And thank you all for being here today.